All right, let's dive right into an absolute geopolitical nightmare. Imagine, just for a second, that you are sitting inside the ultimate high-stakes war room. You and your faction have spent years, literally years, trying to neutralize a rising enemy. You've tried the covert operations, the backroom deals, the clever traps, and absolutely nothing has worked. In fact, your enemies have only grown stronger. And now they're forming alliances that could completely wipe you off the map. It's a scenario that plays out in modern corporate boardrooms and geopolitical theaters all the time, right? But this one is ancient. This is exactly the situation we're unpacking in today's Explainer, where we're looking at a fascinating, high-tension military briefing given by the warrior Karna to his prince, Duryodhana. We are going to examine how a master tactician pivots when the old rules of engagement just completely collapse, demanding a terrifying shift from subtle manipulation to absolute, unapologetic brute force.
So here's the game plan for today's Explainer. 1. The failure of subtlety. 2. An unbreakable new alliance. 3. The closing tactical window. 4. The power of prowess. And 5. The King's Committee.
Starting with Section 1, the failure of subtlety. Basically, why the old playbook is completely useless.
Karna kicks this briefing off with a brutally honest reality check. He tells Duryodhana straight up that all his previous strategies are entirely defunct. Notice the really stark contrast Karna draws here between the enemy's past and present states. He points out that back in the day, the Pandavas were right next door. They were, in his words, unfledged and of tender years. They were vulnerable targets. But Duryodhana couldn't destroy them then. And now? Well, the situation has drastically changed. They're living at a distance, they're fully grown, and they are full-fledged warriors. Think of it like a tiny rival startup you completely ignore that has somehow morphed into a well-funded market giant overnight. Karna's logic here is undeniable. If you couldn't take them out when they were weak and naive, you certainly aren't going to trick them now that they're hardened and experienced.
Because of this, the entire old playbook? Yeah, throw it right out the window. Karna explicitly runs through the methods they can no longer rely on. A policy of conciliation won't work. They want their ancestral kingdom back. Gifts or bribery? Totally ineffective. Spies? Useless. Trying to create disunion among their ranks? Literally impossible. Karna even notes that the very fates themselves seem to be actively aiding the Pandavas. And you know, when a strategist sits down and admits that fate itself is fighting for the enemy, you know for sure the conventional, subtle tricks have reached their absolute limit.
Moving to Section 2, an unbreakable new alliance. Let's look at this geopolitical shift. This brings us to the massive shift that actually made those subtle tactics obsolete in the first place. Karna tells his prince they can never be disunited who have all taken to a common wife. See, the Pandavas have forged this profound marital alliance with Draupadi. Karna emphasizes that women always like to have many husbands, and because she's obtained her wish, she will never abandon them, especially now that they're moving into a position of real prosperity. This shared bond permanently cements their internal unity. You just cannot divide and conquer an enemy that is structurally, fundamentally united by such a deep, shared familial tie.
And getting external help to break them up? Also a dead end. Draupadi's father, King Drupada of Panchala, is described by Karna with 3 very specific, very problematic traits if you're trying to corrupt him. He's honest, virtuous, and not avaricious, meaning external bribery is entirely off the table. Karna plainly tells the prince that even if they offered Drupada their entire kingdom, the guy would never abandon the Pandavas. Plus, Drupada's highly accomplished son is deeply attached to them too. The diplomatic doors are slammed shut. The Kuru faction cannot buy, trick, or negotiate their way out of this one.
Which leads us to Section 3, the closing tactical window. We're talking about a ticking clock. With diplomacy officially dead, the tone in the war room shifts from frustration to pure, unadulterated urgency. Karna lays out a terrifying projected timeline. Right now, in this exact moment, the king of the Panchalas hasn't fully set his heart on fighting, and their immediate forces are actually relatively weak. But very soon, the Pandavas are going to muster their innumerable vehicles, animals, and allied tribes. And then comes the critical threat. The arrival of Krishna with the massive Yadava host. Karna warns that they have to act before Krishna marches into Drupada's city carrying everything before him. This isn't just a window of opportunity, it's a rapidly closing blast door.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why that window is so critical. Listen how Karna assesses the Vrishni threat, specifically Krishna, with just chilling clarity. He tells Duryodhana that there is absolutely nothing Krishna will not sacrifice for the Pandavas. Not wealth, not enjoyment, not even his kingdom. Think about that.
When your enemy has an incredibly powerful ally who is willing to commit total, unconditional sacrifice just to see you destroyed, waiting around is essentially a death sentence. It's a universal law of strategy, as true today as it was back then.
Section 4. The power of prowess. The ultimate strategy.
So, faced with a unified enemy, an incorruptible ally, and a terrifying ticking clock, Karna presents his definitive, brutal solution. He calls for prowess. Now, in this context, prowess means direct military might, unapologetic martial skill, and overwhelming force. Karna frames this not just as a handy tactic, but as the cardinal virtue of the brave Kshatriya warrior class. It is the perfect, diametric opposite of all those subtle, sneaky, underhanded tactics that have failed Duryodhana so far. Subtlety is about avoiding direct conflict. Prowess is about sprinting headfirst into it with your sword drawn.
To convince the room, Karna doesn't just rely on logic, he pulls from the heavy hitters of history and mythology. He cites the illustrious Bharata, who acquired the whole earth. How? By prowess alone. He cites the god Indra, who acquired sovereignty of the three worlds. How? Again, prowess alone. Karna is masterfully framing his strategy here. He's basically telling the prince, look, if you want to rule the world, you have to do what the world conquerors did. You don't scheme your way to an empire, you take it by force.
This leads right into his incredibly blunt, chillingly clear final recommendation. Forget conciliation, forget bribery, assemble the large army consisting of the 4 kinds of forces, and attack. Grind Drupada into the dust, smite the enemy, and exterminate them without the loss of any time whatsoever. Vanquish them by prowess, and then rule the wide earth. It is a stunning, forceful climax to a masterclass in military briefings.
Finally, Section 5. The King's Committee. Bureaucracy in action.
Okay, so we've just heard this heart-pounding call for immediate, decisive war. How does the leadership actually react to this intense strategic briefing? Well, King Dhritarashtra listens to these powerful words from Karna, and his immediate reaction? He applauds him, highly. The king acknowledges that Karna is gifted with great wisdom and is highly accomplished in arms. He validates everything Karna just said, agreeing that a speech favoring prowess suits a great warrior perfectly. Now you might think, at this exact moment, the king is going to order the march, right? Actually, scratch that. Let's look at the actual steps the king takes. Step 1, applaud the great speech. Step 2, call the celebrated ministers, specifically Bhishma, Drona, and Vidura. Step 3, take counsel together to adopt a proposal. Guys, after Karna has just meticulously explained that the tactical window is slamming shut and that every single second they waste allows the enemy to gather an unstoppable army, the king's response is essentially to form a political committee. It's literally like answering a hostile corporate takeover bid by scheduling a leisurely quarterly review for next month. The contrast between Karna's demand for instant, violent action and the king's cautious bureaucratic reality is just absolutely striking.
Which leaves us with this final, burning question. When facing an enemy that cannot be bought, tricked, or divided, and an ally as powerful as Krishna marching straight towards you, is this bureaucratic delay going to cost the Kudu faction their one and only window of opportunity to save their kingdom? When the time for subtlety is clearly past, is a committee really the answer to a ticking clock? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll let you ponder that one until next time.